Hey guys, it's Blaze here and welcome back to my channel for 2022. Now before we get started with the tutorial, I just want to tell you guys that my very first indie game Let's Play is coming out this Friday at GMT +9. So that's Japan time. And if you guys are anywhere else around the world and you are interested in watching that, then please do make a note of it. Don't worry, I will be posting it up as a premiere, so I'll be right there alongside you guys when you watch it for the first time. Anyway, that's all from me. Please enjoy this tutorial video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, it's Blaze here, and welcome back to my channel. Now, before we get into this tutorial video, I just want to say that this Friday, I'm going to start uploading indie game stuff. Indie gaming stuff. So we're gonna start with a Let's Play, and then probably by the end of the month we'll have an actual review for the game that's coming up. I'm gonna keep that secret, but for you guys that are interested, that's gonna go up at the end of the week, and it's going to be a premiere, so I will be right there with you guys watching. And to be honest, I'm kind of feeling a bit nervous about that, but anyway, we'll talk about that when the time comes. So in this video, what we're going to do is right now, our game simply has a combat scene. Now, our goal for at least until the end of this whole series is to overhaul the entire system. One of the things that we do need to do before that, however, is to get room transitions going. So we're going to go from the overworld to the combat and then back to the overworld in this video. So to do that, what we'll do is we'll create a new room right here. I'll just call it room R or RM Overworld. I'll just write RMOW. Now when we create rooms, we can actually order them. Okay, so I'll do this. I will go room. I'm going to rename these so that we know exactly what's what. Here I'm going to call it room combat. And if we hover over a room here and we see these two little square icons with the arrow, if we click that, we can now change the room order. And we also have room inheritance, but we don't really need that. What we're going to do is we are going to set room overworld as the main room, as the home room. I'm not entirely sure how to word that, but we're going to make this the main room. So if we close that out, we can now see that the house icon is with RMOW, which is overworld. And if we press play, we have a black screen, right? So we're not in the combat room anymore. We're out of it. All right, so that's set. This is our overworld. The next thing that we're going to do is, I've already gone ahead and made it, but we are going to create some overworld objects. We need a player and we need an enemy. So let's go ahead and create those objects. I will call mine OW player. I'll create another one. So I'll just duplicate it because there's no code in there right now. We're going to create another one called OW enemy. And then we'll create another one. This third object will be our controller. So OW controller. All right, so let's open all these up. And player is back up top, so that's fine. Let's put in some sprites. I don't have any sprites, so I'll just add this in. And then the same thing for enemy. What we'll do, I don't have enough to go with, so let's just give it V targeting for now. It's gonna look really silly, but it should be fine. Let's go back into RMOW and let's put these three overworld objects in. I have a bad feeling we're not going to be able to see what our enemies look like, but let's try playing the game now. All right, so I hope you guys can see that. Please tell me if you can't, but we have two enemies here, and we have two empty squares, which is our targeting sprites, and we have our player sprite over here. All right, and then of course we have our controller, but we can't see it, so that's all well and good. Now, before we're done with this, I need you to make sure that your controller is at the bottom of the instance list, right at the bottom. We can automate this at a later stage, but we want the functionality of our overworld first and foremost. So that's it for the room. Let's start writing some code in. Okay, first things first, with our player, we're just gonna add in some really basic movement code. So go down into step and add a regular step event. Let me expand, let me make the text a little bigger so it's easier to see. And the first thing that we're going to do is, of course, read inputs. Okay, so there we go, that's done. We have two forms of input. We have horizontal, left and right, and we have up and down as well. And of course, we're using WASD for that. Now, we're not going to be able to move, and I'm sure you guys have seen plenty of movement tutorials. So obviously the next two lines are fairly straightforward. Okay, so there we have it. We have our two lines here. We have X plus movement, and we're multiplying it by 2 so that we can actually move around and do stuff at a much faster pace. And of course we have Y as well, so we can do the same thing, moving up and down. Let me close this RM combat room because we don't really need that anymore, at least for now. Let's go ahead and add in a collision event. So for this one, we're going to add collision with objects and overworld. We want to collide with the enemy, and we're going to do a few more proper checks here. Okay, so for these two lines, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to call the OW controller, and we're going to set these two variables, which we will fill in just a second. We're going to fill in these two variables, and we're going to store the players X and Y into OW controller player pos X, and the same thing for the Y position. We're not done yet. We just need one extra line here. Okay, so for this line, let me just isolate that a second. All right, this line is going to set the room persistency. Anyway, listen, we're going to set the room persistent variable to true. The reason why we're going to do that is basically what we want to do is have our overworld, and the combat room is basically just going to come over on top of that, right? So we're going to carry data from the overworld into the combat room. It's actually not the way I would add in something like this. I would actually go ahead and store all this information in either a DS map or into a JSON file. But because we just want just the basic functionality of transitioning between rooms, we're just going to take this approach, at least for now. I'm going to stay away from writing things to JSON file just because there are probably quite a few beginners here, and I want to save you guys the trouble of having to learn. And besides, doing JSON stuff is a whole tutorial series of itself. All right, so this is done where our collision with the enemy is done. But we're not done with the player just yet. All right, this next step can be missed quite easily. So what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and in the other section, in room start, in the room start event, we are going to move our player to where the controller tells us to go. Okay, so this is fairly simple. What we're going to do is we're going to check to see if OW controller exists within the room. And if it does, we're going to set our X and Y position to whatever the controller tells us to do. Again, this is a very simple implementation of having things in one room and then transferring data around, or rather keeping things persistent, because when we transfer from room to room in GMS, we are overriding and we're resetting the room as we go. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to keep our position even after we change rooms, okay? So just keep that in mind. All right, that's it for our player. Let's go over to the enemy and let's add in a little bit of code for here. Okay, so for this next section, we are going to use just one event actually, because I don't have a sprite to go with our enemy. What we're going to do is when we collide with the player, we're going to add in just 3 lines of code that do a lot of things though. Okay, this first line here is going to be instance delete. or rather not instance delete, we're going to find the place in a list that we're going to create. We're going to take our enemy ID and we're going to remove it from that list. So basically like the def check code that we had in the main combat system. So that's what we're going to do. We will create this list in just a moment because we haven't made that yet. But we still need to do two more things. Okay, this next line, fairly simple. When we collide with the player, we're just going to destroy the enemy instance. And then with the last bit, we are going to go to the next room. Now, I just want to make this point here. Instead of using room go to next, I suggest that you guys use room go to number. And this takes a number of the room that we are going to go to. The reason why I would recommend you guys use this is as you build your game, you're going to have different rooms all over representing different things in your game. You might have houses, you might have caves, forests, etc., etc. And so if you use room go to next when you actually want to go to the combat room, it's not going to exactly turn out the way that you want it to. So I would suggest you guys experiment with using room go to and then putting a number here instead of using go to next. The only reason why I'm using go to next in this case is because we only have 2 rooms in the entire game. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, that's it for the enemy and the player. Let's move to the controller. This is where most of our code will be going into today. So let's get started with it. Okay, first thing, we are going to add a create event. And in this create event, we are going to basically set up the list that we are going to reference. We're going to add a whole bunch of things into that list. And then we're going to do a whole bunch of other things. I don't know, I forgot. Let's just write the code in. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is, of course, create a instance list. Now, I skipped a step. What we're going to do is we are going to create a parent object for all of the overworld objects that we have in game. So everything that the player and the enemies, they are all going to inherit from a separate overworld object, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create an object, and in this object what we're just going to call it p.41. So basically this is going to be the parent of all of our objects. So we go objects, we go overworld, and our player, no, that's not right. That's not right. We go children, we add the objects in. Overworld, player. I wish that I could select multiple objects, but I can't. All right, so that's it. I have a highlight here, and that's just GMS being GMS. Anyway, that's all that this overworld object is going to do. It's going to be the parent of every single overworld object that you will want to be able to interact with. All right, so just those two for now. Let's go back over into our controller. And then we're going to run a for loop and store all of the objects into this list right here. Fairly straightforward, a for loop, and we're going to get the number of instances of overworld. Okay, so that's exactly why we need that parent, because we're going to store all of those into this instance list down here on this line, right? With ds list add, the list name, and what we're actually looking for. Okay, so that's what we need the POW or parent overworld to do. We're not done yet though. We still have a couple more lines to add for our create event. The next thing that we're going to do is find the player, right, in our overworld somewhere, and we're just going to use the function instance find, the name of the object, and whichever number it is. Now we're only ever going to have one object in the game, one player object in our game at all times, so set it to 0. You could add in an extra check here to see that if there's more than one instance of OW player, you delete those other instances. But because we've put everything into our room manually, we don't actually need to run that code. We're not done yet because we need to store the X and Y of the player into some local variables here. Okay, so here it is. We have player pause X and player pause Y. And this is exactly what we're going to do with it. We're going to store the players X and Y into these two variables. All right, that's done for this section, or at least the create event. Let's move on to the next one. And of course, the next one will be, because we created a DS list, we need to destroy that. So in the destroy event, we are just going to check to see if the DS list called instance list exists. We're going to destroy that. And there it is, fairly straightforward. If DS exists, instance list, and of course we're looking for a list type, we're going to destroy that. That's it. That's it for this. This next section is just one line of code, and it's quite similar to the player's room start event, except we're just going to make sure that the room persistence checkbox is unchecked. We set it to false. So in other, room start, if I can find it, get rid of all that, and it's just going to look like one line of code. There it is. If the room is persistent, then we set it back to false. Doesn't really matter. Now, there's an optional step for you guys if you want to debug your game, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to create, I think it's in draw. Here we go, draw GUI. What I want you to do, and like I said, this is optional. You don't have to do this, is we're just going to add in some debug code so that we know exactly what's going on. Basically, what we're going to do is in the top left corner of our game window, we're just going to check to see, we're going to write out to see if the room is persistent or not. And if it is, we're going to write true. If it isn't, we're going to write false. And then we're also going to write down every single item that's in our instance list. So everything except for the controller should pop up. So with all of that stuff created, let me just check if everything's been saved. Yes. When we play the game, we should be fine. So there it is. Our room isn't persistent, and we've got our player. We've got a whole bunch of objects here as well. That's exactly what we were expecting. Let's see what happens when we walk into this enemy here. There we go. We're in our thingy. We're in our combat room. And we're not done yet. We're almost done. Not quite. If we go into the combat room itself, what we're going to do is we're just going to add in some debugging buttons, right? So these are going to be buttons that we don't exactly need them in the final game, but it'd be useful to help us debug our little game out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in O button generic. You can add this in if you want, you don't have to do it. But basically what I'm going to do is in the variables, I'm going to give it a name, debug win. So I want to force a win situation with this function. And of course, we don't have a function for it yet, but what I'm going to do is in the main function, I'll make a function in a second. I'll call it debug win, just keep that simple. And then in our code, what we'll do is we'll go button, and right down the bottom here, we'll write a function here, function and debug win, takes no parameters, open, close. Okay, so it's just something to help us transition from overworld to combat and then back to overworld. Okay, and there it is. So what we're going to do is with our manager object, we are going to go into the combat phase, and we're going to force the phase to go into the win phase. Now, there comes another question. In our manager, if we go into the step event, we scroll all the way down to the phase win, we don't actually have any code here. So generally speaking, unlike going from overworld to combat, going from combat to overworld should be room previous. It should be room previous because GMS stores somewhere inside of its system whatever the previous room was. So that's pretty good. So let's do that. Let's go to, instead of show message, actually after show message, you know what, doesn't never mind. Instead of that, let's just go back into the room, into the previous room. So that's quite simple. Room, go to previous, and then close that off with a semicolon there. Okay, so those are the two small additions for our little game that we have. So let's try playing that now. And if we go into our game, we go here, my debug button isn't there. Oh no, I have a feeling that I put it onto the wrong layer. Yep, I did. So I will delete that on base UI and I will re-add that in. Put that there, double click, variables, and I have to rename it. Debug win. And then the function is also debug win. There we go. That should be proper now. Let's try it one more time. There it is, debug win. So if I click that, it'll take us back into the room and there you can see it. Hopefully you can see it. We only have 2 instances left in our game. And you can see here in the top corner where my mouse is that we only have 2 instances left as well. So go there, debug win again. Now there's only 1. So that's the end of this tutorial. Thank you very much for joining me in 2022. Like I said, there will be new content this Friday. So I'll be doing my very first indie game Let's Play for 2022. Hopefully you guys can join me on that because as far as I'm concerned, you guys are also indie devs. And if I could share your journey with other potential devs and even people that your target audience might be, you know, actual people playing games, then I would be more than happy to share your experience in your games with the rest of the world. So thank you in advance for those who are watching. If you guys aren't interested in that, that's okay. These tutorial videos are going to continue. But until the next one, I am going to take a very short break because I have a tooth that is bothering me. So I will see you next week. In any case, guys, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.